Chapter 40. Skill Evolution, Void Shear. The pocket workshop ran brighter than the day outside, a clean square of task light centered over bench and pegboard. The generator thrummed in its nook, battery charger humming under a load, all of it nailed down by the stable circuits rule layer Drew had forced into being last week. On the pegboard, tools hung in military rows, screwdrivers, linemen's pliers, hand saws, and a set of ratchets so clean they looked fake. One wall of the workshop showed faint blue-white lines from the monorails, but nothing in the room flickered or sparked. That had been the point. Drew had cleared the center of the floor for training. On the concrete, he'd chalked a target. Concentric circles, thickest at the bullseye, with radial lines every 30 degrees. Rook had made a snide remark about arts and crafts time, but he was currently hunched over the open inverter, muttering calculations and shimming a fuse with a copper wire. The man was always working, even when he wasn't. Drew picked up a length of galvanized pipe scavenged from the last Gray City run. He braced one end in the bench vise, the other marked with blue tape exactly where he wanted the cut. He took a breath, forced his right hand to steady, and willed the void. The sensation was almost routine now, a cold crawl up the spine, a numbness behind the teeth. The air in front of his hand rippled, and a hair-thin segment of reality peeled away from the pipe in a perfect arc. The severed piece hit the bench with a tick. Drew's right hand buzzed pins and needles. He flexed it, watched the fingers respond with a half-second lag, and reached for the next test piece, an offcut of plexiglass, a grid marked in 1-inch squares with Sharpie. The rules of the drill were simple. Cut the line, don't lace, no second passes. He placed the plex in the vise, thumbed the next target line, and tried again. The void effect snapped out clean but drifted left at the end, slicing a diagonal instead of the intended square. He stared at the work, jaw set. Missed by 3/8, Rook called from the inverter without looking up. Yeah, Drew replied. Mina sat at the break table, legal pad and pen at the ready, coffee within arm's reach. She wore the official mask of the medical profession, blank, efficient, unimpressed by most things. She watched the cut, then Drew's hands. Your spatial lag is worse today, she said, pen moving. Any paresthesia outside the right hand? Just that side. Noted. The Foreman UI hovered above the bench, bold block letters appearing in the corner of Drew's vision. Void precision, 72%, average deviation, 0.56 inches, motor control suboptimal, LS comment. You're not paid by the inch. Drew ignored the sarcasm and set up the next test. This time, a broom handle, marked with 4 parallel cuts spaced 1 inch apart. He sighted down the line, tensed his hand, and tried to keep the void effect as tight as possible. The first cut went wide, missing the mark completely. The second scored but didn't break through. The third was better, a clean, sharp ring around the handle, the end falling off with a soft clatter. He let his hand rest on the bench, feeling the cold from the void effect worm its way up past his wrist. He focused on breathing. Rook put down the inverter, cracked his knuckles, and walked over, trying to split atoms again, trying to hit a line. You're making it worse with the frustration. Drew looked at the grid-marked plexiglass, the failed broom handle, the growing pile of scrap at his feet. That's the point, he said. Rook picked up the broom handle segment, turned it in his hands, and then rolled it along the edge of the bench. You're getting more consistent. The drift's less random than last time. He pointed to the end. Here, see? Same angle as the last 3. Your head's off, not your hand. Helpful, Drew said. He tried the plexiglass again. This time, the cut followed the line almost perfectly, stopping dead at the chopped end and leaving the square intact. The effort shot a spike of cold up his forearm. The numbness was immediate, and when he tried to flex his hand, nothing happened for a full second. The piece of plex slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Mina's pen clicked. Tremor's progressing. You're in a worse state than yesterday at the same mana level. Drew glared at his hand. Is this what nerve damage feels like? She flipped back a page, more like transient ischemia maybe. Except it's not blood. The foreman added, void use, 32 minutes, user physiology, marginal, recommendation, dial it back. Drew switched to the crowbar for the next drill, knowing the tool and the feeling of its weight would give him a little more control. He set up a concrete block on the slab, marked with a red X. This was the practical test. Use the void to score the cut, then use the bar to finish. He hit the X dead on, voided a neat groove, then used the steel to snap the block on the line. Rook gave a low whistle. That's new. Finer control, Drew said. Trying to waste less. Trying not to pass out every time I swing. He felt the beginnings of a headache behind his left eye, a familiar sign, but unwelcome. Mina approached the bench, inspected the debris, and looked at Drew's hand. Let me see. She ran 2 fingers along his wrist, checked the nails, pressed the tips of each finger to the thumb. Grip strength? Drew squeezed her hand. Weaker. Can you still feel this? She traced a line down his index with the tip of the pen. Barely. She nodded, wrote on the pad. That matches what we're seeing. Spatial drift, numbness, headache, mild tremor, no new symptoms. Drew shook his head. Same as last time, just faster. The foreman, void stress accumulation, 12%, resistance improving, 2% run, comment, you're paying down the debt. He set up the next target, a strip of copper pipe mounted to a 2x4. He aimed, let the sensation of void build until it buzzed, then made the cut. The pipe parted so cleanly it didn't move for a second, then slid off the board and hit the slab with a bell-like chime. This time, Drew's vision blurred at the edge for 3 seconds before snapping back. Rook picked up the cut segment, examined the ends. You could sell this. No burr, no heat scorch, nothing. They'd call it laser. Drew breathed through the headache. Can't feel my thumb. Stop for a minute, Mina said. She checked his pulse, pressed both hands to his temples, and then handed him a glass of electrolyte water. Sip. Not all at once. He took a sip, then another. The tremor receded a little. It was never a clean improvement, but it was something. She looked at the results of the cuts, compared to a page from the last run. Better. But every time you push, the recovery takes longer. Is it worth it? Drew looked at the test grid, the line of failures, the single perfect cut on the copper. Yeah, he said. Mina didn't push. She never did. She made notes, then circled something at the bottom of the page. Rook looked between the two of them, then at the foreman UI still hovering. You gonna try a run with both hands? Not today, Drew said. Already over the line. He let his arm rest on the workbench. The pins and needles started to fade. The workshop light buzzed, soft and even. The generator hummed. The air tasted like metal and electricity, with a faint aftertaste of coffee and blood. Mina sat back at the break table, drew a box around her notes, and watched Drew as he set up one last test, a piece of steel conduit marked with 4 lines for accuracy. He sighted, aimed, and let the void do its work. The first cut missed entirely. The second landed just off the line. The third and fourth were perfect. He set the tool down, breathing hard, and felt the cold drain from his hand. Mina's pen stopped. Recovery is getting faster, she said, more to herself than to him. The foreman, void precision, 81%, user condition, stable, comment, improvement. Tell your hand to keep up. Drew sat on the rolling stool and looked at the pile of finished test pieces, cuts that were cleaner, lines that were straighter, and a day's worth of wear on his nerves. He stared at his hand, flexed the fingers, and watched the pins and needles fade from cold to warm. He thought of the first time he'd used Void Spall, how it had taken his breath and nearly his vision. Now he could run 30 drills, wreck himself, and still drink coffee after. Progress. He looked up at the task light, then at Rook, then at Mina, and felt the odd professional satisfaction of a job site finished for the day, not perfection. Just improvement. He'd take it. It happened during cleanup. Rook was winding copper wire for the next day's relay experiment. Mina was transferring her latest symptom log onto a fresh legal pad, and Drew was sweeping void scrap into a bucket. The workshop smelled like warm dust and hot metal. For a minute, the world pretended it could still run on routine. Then the yard's perimeter flexed. The sensation hit Drew first. A sudden, sickening shift in the back of the skull, as if someone had kicked a soccer ball through the domain and then vanished before the echoes could finish. The foreman UI flared to red. Alert. External vector. Breach. Yard wall. Comment. Someone ordered takeout. Drew dropped the broom and went for the crowbar on the bench. He didn't have time. Something gray and lean detached itself from the back wall of the yard, moving with a speed that didn't match the air around it. It looked like a stalker, but incomplete. One hind leg was bent at a wrong angle, fur matted down by a stripe of blue-white glue, and its right side flickered like a bad video feed. It loped for the workshop with a flat, mechanical hunger. Rook saw it and swore. He went for his bow, but the thing was already at the step. Drew braced at the door, hand tight on the bar, and called the void up, fast and dirty. The sensation was still cold, but it hit him sideways. His spatial sense wobbled, the wall behind the creature bent in and out like a funhouse mirror. He aimed for the head and missed by a foot. The void effect sheared a strip of concrete out of the yard instead. The stalker's paw hit the step, and the noise, the lack of noise, screamed in his skull. Its mirror eyes caught Drew's face, doubling his own panic back at him. He tried again, this time with both hands. The lag was worse. His right hand didn't close when he told it to. The void started, then wobbled, then left a ragged notch in the steel doorframe instead of hitting the monster. It was already inside. The stalker hit Drew at chest height, claws raking across his jacket and left arm. He heard fabric tear, then felt the burn a half-second later. He backpedaled, caught his heel on a bucket, and landed hard on the concrete. The stalker opened its mouth, too wide, and lunged for the throat. Drew rolled, got his left forearm up, and felt teeth sink through the jacket into meat. He tried to call up the void again, but his sense of the yard was going sideways. Everything in the workshop was slightly off. The light over the bench flickered a dull red instead of white, and the foreman UI kept glitching in and out. Mina's voice cut through from the break area. "Drew, duck!" He did. A length of copper pipe came over his head, thrown with unhesitating violence. It hit the stalker on the flank and knocked it off balance. The monster turned and snapped at the air, then fixed on Mina's shape in the break area. She backed away, eyes never leaving it. Drew sat up, shook his hand to get feeling back, and tried to center his vision. The stalker blurred. For a second it doubled. Then he realized there were two of them, the real one and a phantom, a copy that followed it a fraction behind, like an afterimage in the domain. It was the same as when he was about to pass out on a hot roof in July. You had to close one eye and line up the copy with the real thing, or you'd never hit your mark. The stalker launched at Mina. Drew focused differently. Instead of grabbing the void and trying to make a tear, he pictured a blade, not a crowbar, not a gouge, a perfect, fine edge box cutter, drywall knife, the kind of razor line that made inspectors nervous. He forced his hand to close, and instead of a buzzing, the sensation was a cold, steady slice from his wrist to the tip of his finger. He pointed, and the air between him and the stalker went dark. It was a line, a thin, absolutely black slash that extended from his hand to the stalker's shoulder. No jagged edges, no hungry hole, just a two-dimensional fault that existed for exactly one heartbeat. The stalker's head and shoulders kept moving. The rest of it did not. It landed in the break area, but only the front half made it. The back half fell apart into gray motes and dissolved before it hit the floor. For a second, nothing happened. Then the air rushed back, the normal pocket pressure reasserted itself, and Drew felt the world go white at the edges. He wiped his nose, found blood, he tried to stand, failed. The UI blinked. Skill evolution, Void Spall, Void Shear, rank FF effect, creates a precision plane that severs dimensional connections. Cost, low mana, secondary cost, high physical strain, comment, congrats. You've invented the box cutter. Mina knelt beside him, checked his pupils, checked the blood on his arm. Can you hear me? She asked. Yeah, he said, voice thin, sheer. Not Spall. It's different. She looked at the stalker fragment dissolving into motes by the break table. Cleaner, she said. No residue, no waste. He pressed his left hand to the bridge of his nose, trying to stop the bleeding. Rook appeared at the door, bow in one hand, a look of grudging awe on his face. Did you just learn a new trick mid-fight? Drew nodded, then regretted it. Wasn't optional. The foreman, user status, severe void feedback, recovery window, 12 hours, recommend, do not operate heavy machinery. Mina pressed a cold pack to Drew's head. Vitals are stable, she said. You'll be functional in an hour if you don't push. Drew looked at his hands. The right one was shaking, but he could flex it again. The left still burned from the stalker's bite. He looked at the gray line in the air where the void effect had gone through. It was gone. Not a hole, not a scar. The cut had been perfect enough that the world closed up behind it. He stared at the workshop, at the task light over the bench, at the copper wire Rook had been working with, and wondered what else he could cut clean. He pressed the cold pack to his nose and let the buzz in his head drain away. Rook said, if the monsters can get in, you might want to reinforce the yard. Drew gave a bloody, lopsided smile. Yeah, he said. Tomorrow. Mina wrote something on the legal pad and sat down next to him. She offered the pen. Want to describe what you did? Drew shook his head. Just give me a line to hit. I'll make it better next time. The foreman UI faded to a calm blue. Comment, training never ends. Mina reached him before the worst of the shaking set in. She took one look at Drew's face. Drained white, licks blue at the corners, blood weeping slow from his right nostril, and barked an order to Rook. Get the kit. Rook dropped the bow, ran to the storage wall, and yanked the top bin labeled medical. He slid it across the workbench so fast it nearly lost half its contents. Drew was still sitting, both hands braced on the edge of the rolling stool, head down. When he tried to focus, the world ghosted and doubled, every object in the shop making a slight sideways copy of itself in his vision. Mina snapped on nitrile gloves, knelt in front of him, and shone a penlight into his eyes. Pupils, he managed. Unequal and sluggish, she said. Which makes sense if you just mainlined existential entropy. She checked his pulse, counting seconds on her watch. Heart rate? Fast, he said. She pressed 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist, frowned, then thumbed over to the carotid at his neck. Pounding. Good. You're not stroking out. The cold was getting worse. The skin at the backs of his hands and up both forearms felt freezer burned, and his fingers went pins and needles in quick little waves. He flexed the right hand, counted to 3, and tried the left. Same delay, but both responded. Rook had circled to the open workshop door, eyeing the perimeter. He swept the yard with a borrowed flashlight, checked the wall where the fragment had gotten through, then ran a gloved palm along the seam. Nothing, Rook called. Walls solid again. No sign of breach. Drew blinked until the world slowed to 1 copy per object. I'm good, he said, but his voice barely made it past Mina. She glared at him. You are not good. You are sitting up because your body is built out of raw spite. He tried to smile and failed. The Foreman UI phased in over the table. User status, severe void feedback, symptoms, hypothermia, paresthesia, spatial lag, minor hemorrhage, recommendation, no void use for 24 hours, comment, not even a little bit. Drew exhaled slow, tried to make his voice work. I didn't know it would do that. I did, Mina said. She pressed a cold pack to the back of his neck, then pulled a thermal blanket from the medkit and wrapped it around his shoulders with brisk, efficient movements. Because I've been tracking your numbers. The last 3 runs, you had higher void load with less time between incidents. You keep pushing the new power without letting the baseline catch up. Wasn't like the last time, Drew said. It's not just burning. It cuts deeper. She tapped the pen light once, flicked it off, and wrote a note in the legal pad. Describe it. He closed his eyes, let the sense memory replay. Before, it was like biting a chunk out of the world. Now it's a single fine line, less noise, but it costs more. She nodded. Different channel. Different symptom profile. Rook came back into the workshop, set the flashlight on the table, and studied the floor where the new ability had sliced through. The edge of the cut was so clean it looked manufactured even at the scale of poured concrete. There was no residue, no blue-white halo, not even a raised lip where the void had passed. He crouched beside it, ran a gloved fingertip along the groove. You could resell this as a laser level, he said, almost reverent. Drew shivered again, tried to pull the blanket tighter. Mina scribbled a new heading on her pad, Void Shear. She wrote a list of symptoms, drew arrows to earlier entries, then boxed them in. Rook looked up. What now? We need to establish protocols, Mina said. If the void feedback is cumulative, Drew needs a hard limit per shift. No exceptions. He snorted. You'll enforce that? Rook, I have access to every medication in the city, and I know how to make it taste like nothing. She looked at Drew. You'll cooperate? He nodded. Can't afford not to. Rook considered that, then stood, dusted off his gloves, and went to the tool wall. He pulled down a level, a pencil, and a short ruler. He brought them back to the floor, measured the void shear cut, and marked 2 more test lines on the concrete. Don't get up, he said, seeing Drew's intent. You're banned until Mina says otherwise. Drew let his head fall back against the shop wall. Understood. The Foreman UI? Comment, this is how workplaces die. Safety culture. Mina put a hand to Drew's forehead, then checked the backs of his hands. Temperatures climbing. Numbness, still bad, but getting better. She wrote that down, then underlined it twice. I'm going to prep food and electrolytes, she said. Stay put. She moved to the break area, started heating water on the generator stove, and called over her shoulder, Rook, don't let him practice unsupervised. Rook finished marking the concrete. Wouldn't dream of it. Drew closed his eyes. The ache behind them was already fading, replaced by the hollow sensation of post-crash adrenaline. He flexed both hands, felt the numbness go from bone deep to surface. He tried to remember if this was worse than after his first big Void Spall. It was, but the recovery felt faster, like his body had already learned what to expect and started prepping ahead. He risked opening his eyes again. The shop lights were steady, the Foreman window still floating blue in the corner. He focused on the UI panel for the new skill, Void Shear, Rank F, EF, Effect, create linear, high-precision Seaver in local space, cost, 2 mana per use, secondary cost, neural strain, physical debility, comment, cutting tools are dangerous when misused. He tried to imagine what it would be like at higher ranks. Would it be longer, sharper? Would the physical toll get worse, or could he brute force resistance until the edge was manageable? He bet on the latter. Mina returned with a mug of electrolyte broth and a protein bar. She set them beside him, then knelt and inspected his left forearm. She unwrapped the torn sleeve, checked the bite wound, and dabbed it with an antiseptic wipe. You'll need stitches if it goes through. He looked. The teeth had barely broken skin. Most of the blood was from his nose. I'll live, he said. She nodded once, then used the protein bar wrapper to make a quick sling and immobilized his right arm for good measure. Eat. Drink, rest, she pointed at the legal pad. And if you can describe how it feels when you use the new power, write it down. He picked up the pen, hesitated, then wrote, like slicing through 2 layers of wallpaper. First layer resists, second is nothing, he added. Feels safer even if the aftershock is worse? Mina read it, smiled. Good analogy, we'll make a note of it. Rook finished mapping the void line on the floor. You think you could use it on metal? Later, Drew said, voice dry. Mina shot Rook a glare. Don't even. He raised his hands. Just thinking about potential. She sat beside Drew and sipped her own coffee. We all are, she said. He nodded. Tomorrow we try again. Mina's look was half fond, half annoyed. At least wait until you can hold a cup steady. He did, and the tremor was already less. The muscle memory of the day's work took over, and he relaxed, sipping the electrolyte water and watching the edges of the shop sharpen into focus. The cold retreated from his skin. The ache behind his eyes faded. Rook swept the concrete again, measured the second mark, and looked back with quiet pride at the line Drew had cut. Mina wrote a new entry. Skill evolution. Physical cost exceeds prior. Mental recovery is faster. Potential for fine control. Next steps. Incremental testing. Safety lockout. Controlled exposures. She closed the pad and set it on the bench. Drew leaned back, let the exhaustion sink in, and waited for his body to catch up to the day's work. Somewhere in the blue-white hum of the domain, he thought he heard the foreman mutter, "Good shift." He smiled, let the feeling stick for a minute, and thought about what kind of line he'd cut next. Chapter 41. Second jump, Greenfold. The pocket workshop woke early, humming with the nervous readiness of a site before shift. Drew stood at the center of it, hand on the edge of the workbench, sizing up the day's work. Overhead, the task light carved hard shadows onto the bench top. He'd swept the slab twice, not because he was a neat freak, but because the tiniest bits of grit underfoot annoyed him when he needed to focus. Every object on the bench had its place. Leftmost, the cutoffs of steel pipe. Next, the off-white broom handle marked in red pencil. Beside that, a stack of plexiglass squares, edges masked with blue tape, and closest to Drew, the crowbar, resting in a deliberate diagonal, its weight an old friend. Rook paced the yard perimeter with a tape measure, pencil, and a spiral notebook, making slow, deliberate notes after each lap. His boots scuffed the concrete every third step, just enough to keep Drew aware of his presence. He ran a hand through his hair, tapped the pencil to his lower lip, and checked the inventory of materials like a man about to take possession of the day. Mina sat at the break table, the legal pad propped at a 30-degree angle, pen at the ready. She'd arrayed a compact EMS trauma kit on a clean microfiber cloth, scissors open and angled like a warning. Her attention moved in a triangle bench to Drew's hands to the UI, then back to her notes. The camp kettle burbled on the generator stove, a constant low hiss in the background. Drew set the first piece in the vise, 1-foot section of Schedule 40 steel pipe, wall thickness a half-inch. He cranked the jaws until the knurled handle bit his palm and the pipe went nowhere. He marked the line, exhaled, and flexed the right hand. It buzzed already, morning aftershock, not yet the void, but he rolled his shoulders and let the memory of the last run settle in. The foreman's voice arrived early, crowding out the subtle tension. Test run, Schedule 40 pipe, void precision, 67%. Comment, if you miss, you're paying for the replacement. He held his hand steady over the chalk mark, thumb and forefinger together like the world's worst shadow puppet. He let the void answer, cold, then numb, then nothing at all. At the threshold, he flicked his fingers apart, visualizing a blade a hair's breadth ahead of his hand. Reality peeled with a hiccup. A segment of the pipe slid off the rest and rolled 2 inches before stopping against the vice jaw. The cut edge was bright, raw, and so clean it made his teeth ache to look at it. For a half-second, Drew felt nothing at all. Then the right hand came back on with a static pop, a little burst of pins and needles from the pad of his thumb to the tip of the middle finger. He flexed, found the strength was there, but the sense of touch was a beat behind. Rook whistled softly, came over, and rolled the cut piece in his hand. That's cleaner than the hacksaw. No burrs, no flare. It's like somebody lasered it. Mina did not look up from her log. Any tremor? He closed his fist, opened it. Little bit, but not like yesterday. She clicked the pen. Scale of 1 to 10? Drew shrugged. Maybe 3. Mina wrote 3, circled it, then underlined something from the prior page. The UI updated in the upper right of Drew's vision. Void precision, 69%. User mana, 1924, 11924. Side effects minor. Comment, spare the hyperbole. You're not Jesus in the shop. He set up the next material. Plexiglass. The square measured exactly 6 by 6. He clamped it, sighted the line, and tried to match the first cut sensation, tuning out the now tingling in his right hand. The line went true, the void sharper than before. The 2 halves dropped, one barely shifting out of alignment with the other. He picked them up, pressed the edges together, found they matched as if they'd never been apart. Rook ran his finger along the seam, then checked the measurement with a caliper. Deviation is not even 0.1. I think that's within tolerance for any job site. Hell, that's within lab spec. Keep checking, Drew said, voice rough. The cut had been easier, almost automatic. He ran the next trial with the broom handle. The grain and the density changed things. He had to push a little harder, focus on the sensation of the void creeping forward instead of the hand gesture. This time, the cut line charred slightly at the edge, a ghost of burned resin. Rook examined the wood. Wider curve, but the cut is perpendicular. It's so clean there's almost a shine. You could eat off it. Drew held out his hand, palm up. Sensation is worse. Call it a 6 now. Mina left the break table, walked over, and pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, then checked the response along the pads of the fingers. Color's fine. Grip strength, he squeezed her hand, watched her eyebrow arch as she measured the force. 30% weaker than baseline, she said, almost amused. If you're left-handed, that's fine. If not, you're going to be using your left more today. Copy that. He moved on to the crowbar. This was, technically, unnecessary, but every test needed a control. He balanced it on the bench, hand at the midpoint, and visualized the void cut at a shallow angle, just enough to test if the edge would fragment. He pressed, flicked, and felt the world slip for less than an instant. The end of the crowbar parted, neat as a wedge. The cut surface shined like blue steel in the task light. He let out a long, slow breath. The foreman's sarcasm was immediate. Crowbar test. Pass. Comment. If this goes badly, you'll have to crowbar with a stub. Drew flexed his right hand and found his thumb and index finger had gone from numb to almost unresponsive. He watched, fascinated, as his hand made the right shape a second after he sent the command. Rook grinned, teeth white against the dark of his beard. That's a new one. You ever try working a sight with the gloves taped shut? Drew laughed, then shook the hand hard. That's how we lost Olsen on the Foxton job. Mina cut through the nostalgia. Take a break. Drink water. He did, hands shaking faintly as he poured the glass, but he managed not to drop it. Rook measured the 4 new pieces, jotting numbers into his notebook. The metal cuts are all within 0.3 millimeters. Wood is within a millimeter, minus the surface char. The plexiglass is basically perfect. The bar, he looked at the crowbar tip, smiled. It's the sharpest cut of the day, like it was always supposed to be that way. Getting easier, Drew said, voice lower. Mina wrote something on the pad, then turned to Drew, eyes clinical and calm. How's your vision? He blinked. The air had halos, the blue-white lines on the walls blurring slightly at the edge of his sight. Fuzzy. Like after you stand up too fast. Sit for a bit. Rook, do another round in 15. The foreman's voice dropped in like an anvil. Void load, elevated, user condition, suboptimal, recommendation, 10-minute recovery, comment, rest isn't failure. Drew leaned on the bench and watched the afterimage of the void cuts linger, 2 shades brighter than the air around them. He flexed the right hand, let the numbness flood, then waited for the feeling to crawl back. It was better than last week, but not by much. Mina set a glass of electrolyte water at his elbow. If you keep up with these runs, you'll have to cycle the hands every few hours. Otherwise, you risk a permanent drop in fine motor. He looked at her, half-smile forming. Can you train for it? She shrugged. If you can survive the adaptation, maybe. But I'd rather you kept your hands, personally. Noted. Rook looked up from the notebook, eyes sharp behind the numbers. Did you notice the mana drop? Drew checked the UI. User mana, Den 1084. Yeah. That's almost half gone in 4 cuts. Is that sustainable? Rook asked. He considered, then nodded. If I pace it, yes. Mina watched him unblinking. You won't, though. Will you? He grinned, a little lopsided. Probably not. The foreman chimed in. Comment, sometimes the boss knows when to push. Sometimes he ends up in the... Drew finished the glass, let the cold spread through his chest, and started flexing the right hand again. He could feel the sensation returning, the numbness retreating like a slow tide. He imagined nerve endings growing back in real time, little sparks of recovery tracking the void's damage. Rick returned the test pieces to the bench, lining them up for comparison. We should make a display, he said, like those companies that test saw blades by cutting a row of bricks, could put it above the bench. Motivation? Drew asked. Documentation? Rook said. Anybody else sees it, they'll know what you're capable of. Mina didn't respond, but her eyes lingered on Drew for a beat longer than normal. He glanced at the UI. Void precision, 72%. Recovery, 40%. Comment, you improve every shift if you survive. He looked at the line of cut materials, at Rook's neat columns of numbers, and at Mina's medical log. Then he looked at his own hands, one still tingling, the other steady, and felt the odd private pride that came from building something nobody else in the world could quite understand. He wasn't building perfection, he was building the limit. And for today, that was enough. Mina didn't waste time on bedside manner. The second the numbers were in, she shifted from watcher to examiner. Up, she said, pointing Drew to the break table. He moved clumsy, hand still half dead from the last cut, but walking straight. Mina already had the table cleared and her kit laid out, pen light between 2 knuckles like a scalpel. She started at the eyes. Look here, she said, then shined the pen light into each in turn, watching the pupil snap down to pinpoints and then relax. Her gaze flicked to the legal pad, sluggish but no worse than baseline. She didn't ask if he saw the halos. She knew. "Follow my finger," she said, moving her index in tight arcs then sudden jumps. His eyes kept up, but the right eyelid lagged a little, drooping as he worked to track the last angle. She frowned, jotted a note, then held up a squeezeball yellow, dusted with a medical logo from an ENT conference that had probably ended with a raffle and donuts. "Grip." Drew squeezed, first left, then right. The left was normal, strong, smooth, no give. The right pulsed, then stopped, like the tendons had decided to phone it in for the day. Mina checked the squeezeball, read the embedded gauge, and wrote the number without telling him. "You're down 30% from yesterday on the dominant hand." He flexed the hand, nodded. "Feels about right." Rook drifted over from the bench, notebook open, and tapped the page for emphasis. "The cuts on the metal are clean to within 0.3 millimeters. The wood's messier splintering at entry, probably due to variable density. The plex, still perfect." Mina pointed at the wood piece. "He's overshooting the start of the cut. That's where the tremor gets him. It matches what I'm seeing in the neuro." She didn't even look at Drew as she said it, just handed the ball back. He squeezed again, forcing the motion, but the nerd still felt lazy, the leg stubborn. Mina put a line under her latest entry. "Here's the deal. No more than 3 void shears per hour, minimum 10-minute rest between each. If you feel numbness above the wrist, you stop. Non-negotiable." She looked up, daring him to argue. Drew looked at the two of them. "We can't afford to be cautious forever. If we don't push the edge, you lose the hand," Mina said quick, "or you lose both, or you fry the nerve and end up with a glove of meat for the rest of your life." Her tone was cold, but the pause before the last sentence was all human. "There's always another job." "There's only one you," Rook nodded, closing his notebook. "She's right. With the crew we need more days, not one hero moment." Drew ground his teeth, considered, then said, 3 per hour, 10-minute rest, no full hand numbness." He raised the right hand, flexed it. "But when it matters, we go all in." Mina nodded once, satisfied. The foreman's window flickered in Drew's vision. Void feedback, moderate, user condition, red, recovery window, 1-2 hours, comment, "This is why we have rules." He almost smiled, then sat back, feeling the cold ebb from his fingertips. The work was worth it, but the cost was climbing. Mina pressed the pen light off and started prepping a protein shake, her way of saying "case closed." She watched Drew drink, then rechecked the hand, softer this time. "It'll come back," she said. He didn't ask how she knew. Rook left the wood and metal on the table for review, the line of cuts an ongoing record of failure and progress both. They'd made protocols, set the limits. Tomorrow, he'd break them. But for now, the crew had consensus, and that was enough to get through a shift. The UI faded to blue, like the foreman was clocking out for the evening. Comment, "The only real safety is to never work. Good luck with that." They were 3 minutes into postmortem when the world bucked. Rook was reading back the day's numbers, voice as steady as an auctioneer. "We're seeing drift in the wood, but everything else is trending tighter. Metal variance, 0.3. Plex variance, sub 0.1. Crowbar." He looked at Drew, expecting a joke. Drew just flexed the right hand, tried to make the blood move faster. Mina had her pad flat, copying the summary with the careful printing of a paramedic doing chain of custody paperwork. "We'll run the next series in the morning," she said, not asking permission. Drew nodded, tried to hide the spark of relief. He could still feel the nerves in his hand, but they tingled with the anticipation of future damage. The tremor hit on the upstroke of Rook's pencil. It started as a vibration in the soles, the subtle way the floor sometimes warned of a coming earthquake. But the pocket slab didn't shake like any slab in the real world. Instead, it hummed, then shuddered, then rippled. A standing wave that ran from the workshop wall to the break area and back again, rattling the glasses and making the metal offcuts shimmy across the workbench. The lights flickered. This was not supposed to happen. The stable circuits rule should have locked every electron into compliance. But the bulb stuttered, died, then relit in cold blue. The foreman's UI went all caps at the top of Drew's vision. Warning, unplanned access vector detected. Location, yard perimeter, impact, imminent. Comment, who ordered delivery? Drew's spatial sense pinged, then rang like a headache in the back of his skull. Something was pushing through the wall behind the yard, something that didn't respect the edges of the pocket, something with momentum. He looked at Rook. Rook had already dropped the pencil and gone for the bow on the rack, fingers blurring as he checked the line. Mina shoved the legal pad aside and reached for the trauma kit. Drew made it to the yard just as the breach finished manifesting. The far wall, the one he'd poured out of memory and reinforced with domain mana until it felt like real bulged inward. It was a clean, rounded deformation, like the concrete was made of rubber and the world was blowing a balloon through it. For a second, Drew saw the silhouette of a stalker pressed against the inside of the wall, all bones and elongation and those goddamn mirrored eyes. The wall gave. It didn't shatter. It peeled. Concrete, rebar and all. The thing slipped through the opening, hitting the ground with a double thud, claws biting into the slab. Its fur was the color of fireplace soot. Its body was all leverage and speed, built for sprinting, with a long back and a tail that curled like a scythe. But the worst was the eyes, perfectly mirrored, reflecting not just the workbench and the pocket yard, but Drew himself, distorted and tripled in the silvered orbs. The void edge of the breach stayed, jagged, leaking blue-white energy from the torn seam. The stalker's head snapped to Drew, and it moved. Rook's arrow was already in the air, but the stalker had seen the motion. It twisted, let the arrow pass through the spot where its neck had been a second before, then tensed for a lunge. Drew felt the numbness in his right hand spike from 6 to 10. Every instinct said to grab the crowbar, but the memory of the cuts was still hot in his nerves. The foreman comment, "You're up, boss." He set his feet, planted his numb hand on the bar, and braced. The stalker covered the 10 yards of yard in a single ugly blur. Drew brought the crowbar up, but the right hand barely responded. The tool was a club in his palm, slick and uncooperative. The stalker hit him hard, the full weight into the chest. He rolled with it, letting the thing's momentum drag them both across the concrete, then kicked up with both legs. They separated, the stalker skidding and spinning, Drew tumbling but keeping the bar between himself and the thing. It screamed. Not a sound, but a scraping at the inside of his hearing, like nails down the hallway of his skull. Mina's voice came from behind. "Drew," he risked a glance. She was at the break table, hand out, holding a keen light like a club. Rook had knocked another arrow and was waiting for a shot that wouldn't risk hitting Drew. The stalker circled, never breaking line of sight. Its head cocked at odd angles, analyzing, learning. Drew flexed the numb hand. The thumb was dead weight, but the fingers moved. He didn't have time to plan. He let instinct carry him, stepped in, and swung the bar low more for space than impact. The stalker dodged, then came up and in, jaws for the throat. He let it. He didn't fight the line, just turned with the bite and jammed the crowbar between the jaws as they snapped shut. It clamped down, hard enough to dent the steel. The impact sent a white-hot jolt through his right hand, then nothing at all. Mina's keen light arced in, clipping the stalker behind the ear. The plastic cracked, spilling luminescent goo across the fur. The monster recoiled, distracted. Drew rolled free, but the right hand refused to close around the bar. He switched to his left, awkward, but it would have to do. The stalker reset, circled again, this time keeping more distance. The void along the seam of the wall flickered, drawing the stalker's attention for a split second. Drew felt the numbness migrate up to his elbow. He looked at the thing, at the mirrored eyes, and saw his own reflection, tired, shaking, one hand limp at the side. He grinned, teeth showing. "You're not the only one who can move sideways." The stalker lunged, faster than the first time. Drew let the bar go, caught the monster's paw in both hands, and let the void into his left arm. He imagined the line, the perfect edge, the sharpness he'd practiced on steel and wood and even his own crowbar. The world bent, the pocket twisted, and Drew drew a perfect cut through the stalker's wrist, an inch above his own knuckles. The limb parted. The monster shrieked, and this time it was a real noise, sharp and echoing off the concrete. He threw the severed paw aside. The stalker scrambled, found its balance, but the calculus had changed. It backed up, tail lashing. Rook's second arrow found its target, a lucky shot, straight into the soft tissue beneath the lower jaw. The stalker crumpled, then twitched, then oozed away into a cloud of ash that spiraled into the void breach, gone before Drew had finished falling to one knee. The tremor stopped. The lights came back, full and steady. The breach in the wall closed, as if someone was zip-tying the world back together. Drew sat on the slab, numbness receding in the left arm now, the right still dead, but he was alive. The pocket was alive, and the monster was gone. Mina was beside him a second later, fingers at his throat, checking the pulse, ignoring his protests. Rook was at the wall, arrow ready, watching for more. The foreman hovered above, text steadier than the last half hour. Comment, "Nice work, boss. Remind me not to shake your hand." Drew grinned through the fatigue. Wouldn't feel it anyway. He closed both hands, felt the life coming back, and let Mina do her checks. The crew was still standing, the pocket too, and that was all that mattered. The stalker wasn't dead. It was just pissed. Drew didn't realize how bad the lag had gotten until he tried to stand. His vision doubled and tripled the stalker's movement, every shift of its limbs drawing a ghost behind it. The void feedback burned from his elbow to the tips of his fingers, now both hands, now up the shoulder. When the stalker screamed and tensed for the next charge, Drew's body responded half a second after his brain gave the order. He rolled to the left, trying to get his feet under him. The world slanted. For a split second, he saw the crew behind him, Mina with the medkit, Rook pulling another arrow. He felt the stalker launch before he saw it. Spatial sense flared, and approaching pressure, a negative of presence more than a thing. The stalker's jaws aimed for the throat. It didn't even bother with a feint. It wanted the kill. Drew's left hand was still working. He reached out and pictured not a hole, not a bite, but a sheet of nothingness, stretched taut from his fingertips to the floor. He remembered the feel of the perfect cut on the plex, the impossibly clean line, and he forced the memory through his body into the space ahead. The void answered. It always did. He swept the hand through the air, from hip to opposite shoulder, like slicing drywall with a utility knife. The edge he called up wasn't hungry and ragged like Spall. It was flat, cold, and so thin it left no shadow. The stalker was mid-leap. The Void Shear touched the tip of its nose, then ran clean through to the tail. For one heartbeat, the two halves of the thing kept moving together. Then the front hit Drew in the chest. He caught it on instinct. Staggered back, and the back half dropped to the floor, a neat section as if somebody had parted it for a biology lab. There was no blood, no resistance. The insides of the thing were identical to the outside, ash and wire and memory of muscle. Then both halves collapsed, dissolved, not in blue-white threads, but in a cascade of pale, drifting motes. The pieces of the stalker faded as they fell, vanishing into nothing before they'd even finished hitting the slab. Drew hit his knees, then stayed there, hands braced, air wheezing in and out of his lungs. A line of warmth rolled down his upper lip, blood bright against the gray floor. The UI flashed, front and center, skill evolution, Void Shear, rank FA defect, creates precision plane severing matter, cost, minimal mana, secondary cost, high physical feedback, comment, nice cut, boss. He tried to catch his breath, but the world spun. The feeling in his left hand was gone, like the nerves had detached and were floating elsewhere. The right hand returned in cold spikes, pins, and needles, a tide of sensation coming back to drown him. The air was silent. The cut on the floor where the void plane had gone was so perfect, Drew had to lean closer to believe it was real. There was no mark, no residue, just a faint shift in light. Mina appeared at his side, the keen light haloing her face with green. She wiped the blood from his lip, checked his pupils, then clamped his chin with a firm, no bullshit grip. You with me? He nodded, slow. Describe the cut, she said. Clean, he managed. Better than before. No mess. She smiled, grim. Good. Rook poked at the place on the floor where the stalker had vanished, left nothing. Not even dust. The foreman UI flickered, then popped up a message. User status, severe void feedback, recovery required, 12 hours, suggestion, do not operate heavy machinery. Drew laughed, or tried to, but it came out as a cough and a fresh nosebleed. He wiped his face and looked at his hands, flexing each finger in turn. The feeling was coming back, slow, but the price was real. He'd made the lime. He'd survived. Next time, he'd make it cleaner still. Mina had Drew sitting up and stable before he'd finished processing the taste of blood. She pressed a cold pack to the back of his neck, the other hand steady on his shoulder. Pupils uneven, she said, shining the pen light into each in turn. Pulse is high, but you're not going into shock. Stay with me. He nodded, slow, vision still full of blue-white floaters. The yard wall where the stalker had breached wavered in and out of focus, the scene closing in slow, uneven increments like a wound being sutured by visible hands. Rook's voice came from the far side of the workshop. Tiers mostly sealed, but there's a shimmer. Domains at maybe 80% integrity and climbing. He ran a gloved hand along the fresh surface, then crouched to inspect the faint residue left behind by the stalker's exit. No new movement on the perimeter. Drew tried to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat. He wiped blood from his lip and spat a red thread onto the slab. Feels like I stuck my head in a transformer box, he said. Mina didn't smile, but she looked less worried. You'll be conscious through it, just don't stand up fast. She offered the electrolyte water again. He drank slow, hands still shaking. The UI hovered at the edge of his vision, the warning text somehow more insistent than usual. Severe void feedback detected. Symptoms, hypothermia, motor impairment, hemorrhage, recommended action, extended recovery, comment. Do not ignore this warning. He flexed his hands. Both responded, but the fine motor was shot. He pressed a palm to the concrete, focusing on the feeling of cold through skin instead of the drift in his head. Rook joined them at the break table, holding a plastic sample tube with a pinch of gray residue inside. Got some of the stalker's leftovers. Might be worth testing in the new setup. He looked at Drew. You good? Will be, Drew said. Give it a shift. Mina started logging symptoms, voice steady, pen moving in quick ticks. Immediate nosebleed, transient paresis in both hands, loss of balance, visual disturbances. Improved after 10 minutes, not back to baseline. She looked at Drew. You remember what happened? Yeah, called a void plane. Cut it clean. She nodded, recorded the answer, and gave him a sidelong look. You sure it was worth it? He nodded again, slower this time. Cleaner, less mess, more control. It's not like Spall, it's almost elegant. He grinned, tired. If you're going to have a nervous breakdown, might as well make it efficient. The foreman's UI surfaced. Text large. Skill. Void Shear. Rank F effect. Create high precision Seaver. Or cost 2 mana US. Rest marker US. Feedback. Severe S. Comment. This tool cuts both ways. Mina put the log aside and checked the cold pack. You'll be back to function by tomorrow. But if you spike another fever, I sedate you and tie you to the cot. Drew almost smiled. Deal. Rook dropped the residue sample on the workbench. We should reinforce the yard. If something else wants in, better to catch it early. Drew's mind was already leaping ahead. More domain mana for the wall, maybe a mesh of conductive wire, more redundancy on the stable circuits. He scanned the UI looking for a way to automate detection, something that would trip if a new access vector started to form. Set up a proximity alert, he said. Run it off the same rule layer as the electrical. If the wall starts to bulge again, I want a 10-second warning. Rook made a note, already thinking through the wiring. Mina watched the two of them, then cleaned the blood off Drew's face with a practiced swipe. I'm going to prep a meal. You'll eat, you'll sleep, and you'll practice with a butter knife before you try the void again. He barked a real laugh at that. The world spun, but the humor cut through the fog. The foreman hovered, almost approving. Comment, excellent. Now let's see if you can keep it up without self-destructing. He closed his eyes, let the sensation of the cut replay in his memory, the perfect line, the nothingness that replaced matter with absence. It was worth it. It would always be worth it. Mina checked his pulse one last time, then left to make the food. Rook went to reinforce the yard. Drew stayed seated, letting the blue-white motes fade from vision, feeling his nerves regrow and his bones settle. The pocket was stable, the crew was alive, and tomorrow, if the world wanted a better cut, he'd give it one. Chapter 42. Pocket upgrade. Soil plus water. He drags in clean water and soil. The pocket starts supporting food growth barely. Practice started with the hum of the generator and the smell of coffee and blood. Drew set his feet shoulder width on the smooth concrete of the workshop. Hands braced either side of the vise, and ignored the way his right thumb stuttered on the first attempt to grip. The clamp lamp burned white and honest overhead, stable for once, held to reality by a wire cage rule layer and the stubborn insistence that this was a place work happened. On the bench, 3 targets, arrayed like a crude science fair schedule, 40 steel pipe, a plexiglass square, and the off-white shaft of a broom handle. Each wore a band of blue tape or a Sharpie line marking the intended cut. He flexed the hand. The numbness was less than yesterday, but more than before Manafall. Between the fingers, skin flushed from the usual pale to a raw, angry red. He considered that normal. Rook hovered at the perimeter of the workshop, multitasking, half an eye on the generator in its alcove, the rest on the pile of salvage on the storage racks. When the generator skipped a beat, Rook's hands twitched, small adjustments, nothing frantic. The man moved like he'd learned not to get in the way of violence, but also not to be the first body through the door. Mina watched from the break table, legal pad propped in front of her, pen at the ready, medical kit open to the correct page. She wore her usual uniform, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair in a tight knot, face angled to catch the least bit of drama and the most detail. Her gaze felt like a checklist, not a comfort. He lined up the first cut. The UI floated in the upper right, bold block text in blue-white, Void Shear, initialization. Target, S40 pipe. Expected deviation, 0.35 inch. User mana, 22024. So comment, do not operate if you have been drinking. He curled thumb and forefinger, summoned the void, and felt the cut before he saw it. It started as a cold itch at the base of the thumb, then ran up the arm in a fizz of carbonated static. The air over the pipe stuttered, then a plane of absence snapped into being, paper thin, nothing to see unless you caught the afterimage in the workbench light. The pipe parted with a sharp click and a flinch in the wrist. A hot cold knife ran through the palm, and the world slanted a little, just for a second. Better, Mina said, not a question. Any pain? Drew waited for the world to settle, then flexed the hand again. 5 out of 10, he said, numb after. Mina jotted, then shone the penlight into his left eye, watching the pupil clamp down. Lag on the right, she noted, but less than yesterday. Rook ran a hand along the length of the generator, listening to the pitch, then turned back to the bench. Cut straight, he called. Little bevel on the exit, but clean. The foreman's window flickered up, void precision 78%. Motor function adequate. Recovery rate improved E. Comment, someone's been practicing. Drew wiped sweat off his upper lip, then set up the plexiglass. He marked a line, tightened the vise, and let the void pool up again. This time the cut was slower. He tried to picture the void as a blade, not a bite. The effect was immediate. The plane shimmered, then traced an invisible edge through the acrylic, parting it so fine the two halves barely moved. He exhaled and blinked the afterimage away. This time, the pain was sharp and mean, shooting from the wrist to the crook of his elbow. The UI registered the hit. Mana, 20 weight 24. Void feedback, mild to tremor, present. Comment, if you cut yourself, you're cleaning it up. Mina's pen snapped. You shaking, she said. He looked at the hand. It trembled, but not enough to drop the tool. He forced it steady, then reached for the broom handle. Last one, he said. Rook brought the cut pipe over for inspection, ran a caliper along the edge, then whistled. This is better than anything you did with Spall. No flare, no edge debris. If you did this on a job site, they'd call it manufactured. He grinned, crooked. I'll take the pay bump. The foreman's text glared at him. You don't get a pay bump. You get a headache. Drew ignored it, lined up the wood. The broom handle was the trickiest grain and density changed every inch, and the void didn't always behave in mixed material. He sighted the mark, let the void thicken, then pushed the cut through with a flick. The handle split with a sound like splitting celery. The pain this time was a cold, creeping numbness of 3 fingers. He dropped the segment onto the bench and flexed. The ring and pinky went unresponsive, slow to answer. Mina set the pad down, came over, and pulled his hand flat onto the table. Look here, she said, snapping the pen light in front of his eyes. Pupils? Normal, he lied. She shone the light anyway, then pressed her thumb into the pad of his palm. Any sensation? He tried to feel it. Tingling, not pain. Rook came closer, crowding the workbench. Is that new? Worse than yesterday, Mina said. She checked the nails, then ran her own pen along the skin. Delayed, but not dead. The UI confirmed void exposure, moderate neural pathway stress, high I. Recovery estimate 3 hours. Comment, you're going to miss lunch. Drew looked at the line of finished cuts. Steel, plastic, wood. But the line's better. Mina didn't answer right away. She wrote, then boxed the last number twice. The line is better, she agreed. But your hands are worse. He closed the right hand into a fist, forced the motion. Cost of doing business. She gave him a look that suggested in other lives she would have been an excellent union rep. Rook picked up the broom handle and inspected the edge. No char this time, clean as a factory. Drew let the hand relax, rolled his neck, and tried to shake out the deadness. How long till the numbness fades? Mina shrugged. An hour if you rest. More if you don't. He knew which answer he was taking. The UI ping began. Void Shear upgrade. Precision improved. Sensory damage accumulates. Comment. Congratulations on upgrading from sledgehammer to scalpel. Try not to slice your own fingers off. Mina returned to the break table and made another notation. Next run we start with your left. Drew grinned. Cowardly. Practical, she said. She poured a glass of water, brought it to him, and watched as he forced the numb hand to grip it. How's the taste? He sipped. Metallic, but not as bad as before. It's water, she nodded. That's a point for you then. Rook leaned back against the storage rack and started spooling wire for the day's next project, eyes flicking to the UI whenever the blue-white text updated. If the generator goes, we lose the stable circuits, yeah? Yeah, Drew said. And then everything in here gets weird. Rook made a note in his spiral. I'll keep an eye on the fuel. If it hiccups, yell. Mina checked the medkit, then Drew's face. Headache? Nothing new. She wrote that down too. Drew flexed the right hand. The deadness was receding, but every pulse brought a tiny pinprick, like static electricity. He looked at the line of cut pieces again, saw the blue-white edge of the steel pipe shine in the lamp, and thought about the time he'd cut his own thumb to the bone at age 19, working a night job with nothing but a hacksaw and an empty first aid kit. He survived that too. He lined up the next piece, this one a section of copper pipe. He glanced at Mina. She arched an eyebrow. Going for 4? He grinned, then let the void build, slow this time, trying to make the line as gentle as possible. The UI, Void Shear, copper, expected deviation, 0.15 inch, user mana, 18 Het 24s weighty. Comment, go ahead, what's the worst that could happen? The void snapped through the copper. The edges almost glowed with newness. The pain this time was more distant tolerable, like biting down on a cold filling. Better? Mina asked, pen poised. Less pain, Drew admitted. Maybe the copper helps. She wrote that down too, then offered him a protein bar from the medkit. Eat something with sugar, blood glucose tanks after a hit. He tore the wrapper, chewed. The flavor was sawdust and peanut, but it grounded him. Rook was already wiring the copper to the bench, making something out of nothing with practice speed. Drew watched the two of them. Crew cobbled together from need and luck and wondered how long they'd hold before reality found a way to eat them all. He didn't ask. He finished a bar, flexed his hand again, and started chalking lines on the next target. The foreman UI chimed in one last time for the hour comment, job's not done until you're bleeding or the work is perfect, usually both. He almost smiled. The next line, he promised himself, would be better than perfect. It came at 11:32, right as the blue-white clock on the bench ticked into the next interval. The slab under Drew's boots flexed, then buckled, a low-frequency wobble that threatened to turn his knees inside out. The workshop's overhead lamp swung left, then right, as if the whole domain had been punched from the outside. Drew's first thought was generator failure, but the hum stayed steady. The light didn't flicker. The only thing that changed was the wall behind the pipe rack. It started to bulge, like a hernia pushing through a steel belt. He didn't have time to warn anyone. Rook already saw it. He was off the wall and drawing his bow in a single practiced motion. Mina moved sideways to the medical station, not running, but setting her feet, ready. The foreman UI spat angry warning text, access vector, external, breach imminent. Comment, this is why we can't have nice things. The wall bulged again, and the gray surface split with a silent tear. No dust, no debris, just a slow-motion rupture and the hideous certainty that whatever came through would not be a payment from Vale. The thing that emerged wore the shape of a stalker, but meaner its hind legs longer, front limbs splayed and hooked like bolt cutters. Its hide reflected nothing. In the shop light, it looked like a hole in matter. Eyes were wrong, all pupil, no iris, and too many. The mouth opened sideways, more slit than hinge, ringed in pale teeth and what looked like dried latex. Drew didn't even think. The left hand was dead, so he called the void with the right, no finesse, no build. He sliced air, the line answered, a single flat plane, not visible, but he saw it in the way the world buckled along the trajectory. It hit the stalker at the mid-shoulder. The creature's leading limbs dropped, severed, clean as anything he'd done on the bench. It barely slowed. Instead, the stalker hurled itself at him, trailing two arms that didn't know they'd been cut. The severed parts hit the concrete, rolled and dissolved into gray motes, but the body kept coming. Drew braced, felt the pain come late. The edge of his hand screamed with every pulse, and his vision blurred just at the edge of the stalker's outline. Rook's arrow punched into the thing's side, thunking into knot ribs. The shaft didn't stick, it passed through and came out the other side, wobbling in the air before clattering to the slab. The stalker flinched, but it never lost trajectory. Mina's voice, "Drew, down!" He ducked or tried to, but the world had a second's worth of lag, and the stalker clipped his left shoulder. The force knocked him sideways into the bench. He almost lost his grip on the crowbar, but the muscle memory saved him. He rolled with the hit, swung back, caught the tail end of the thing as it tried to circle. The void buzzed along his hand, every cell alive and dying at the same time. He saw the line he needed, vertical, base of the neck through the center. He forced the cut, pictured the blade instead of the bite. The plane went off, so thin the UI barely caught it. Void Shear, success. MAR-GC 24s. Pain Index, 810G24. Comment, that'll leave a mark. The stalker split, front to back, both halves wriggling for a full second before the motes overtook them. They left no blood, just a quicksilver spray of condensed mana that the domain sucked up like a thirsty shop rag. Drew landed hard, hand numb from the cut, and tried to stand. The room rotated. He caught himself on the vise and a warm slickness hit his upper lip. Nosebleed. Again. He pressed a thumb to the nostril, but the hand was slow, 3 fingers not listening. Rook had another arrow knocked, eyes on the breach. Mina was already at his side, hand braced on his shoulder, eyes checking for exit wounds. "You good?" she said. He tried to answer, but the metallic taste filled his mouth and turned his tongue to cement. The UI didn't help. Void feedback, severe, neural impairment, extending, recommended action, restorative intervention, eyes axe forward, comment, sure, do another one. He looked at the wall. The breach was closing, but it wasn't healed. The scene glowed a dull blue, vibrating at the edges. Like the world couldn't make up its mind whether to be solid or empty. Mina pinched his nose with expert force, then checked his pupils. Dilated, she muttered, tracking slow. You with me? He nodded. The world lagged, then caught up. Rook kept watch then, after a beat, came over to check the breach. Nothing else. For now. Mina walked Drew to the break table, forced him down, and packed gauze to the nose. Stay awake for a minute. Hands? He looked at them. The left was dead, the right on a 15-second timer. Right's worse, he admitted. Any chest pain? Just the usual, he said. The words came out muffled by the gauze, but she heard them. She wrote something, then set a bottle of electrolyte water in front of them. Sip. No more cuts for an hour. He tried, and almost managed not to spill. Rook stared at the breach, then poked the wall with a screwdriver. It's got a resonance, he said, like it wants to open again. Can you patch it? Drew didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes, searched for the feeling of the domain, the pressure, the tension, the way it always hummed at the edge of sense. The foreman was waiting. Comment, it's your house. Patch it or move out. He summoned the domain's energy, willed the wall to close. The blue shimmer receded, but the seam stayed. A scar, not a healing. Temporary, he said. I'll need to reinforce it tomorrow. Rook nodded, still holding. Mina checked his vitals, then made him do a finger count test. He got it wrong the first time, but better the second. Better or worse, she asked. Same, he said. Pain's less. She wrote it down. The UI congratulated him. In its way, congratulations, Void Shear tested in combat. Successful application. Increased damage, increased cost. Comment, next time, lead with the upgrade. He wiped blood from his face, looked at the workbench, then at the empty yard. The stalker's remains were gone. Nothing left but the seam in the wall and the taste of iron in his mouth. Rook cleaned up the stray arrow, then checked the generator again, as if grounding himself by routine. Mina wiped the bench and repacked her kit, but didn't sit. She hovered, checking for aftershocks. Drew flexed his hands again, found the right one working now, if barely. Did I get it? Rook grinned, wolfish. Split it clean. Never saw anything like it. The foreman agreed, comment, good cut, try not to die next time. He smiled, then let the fatigue catch him, a lead blanket over the bones. Tomorrow, he'd fix the wall. Today, he'd focus on recovery. Mina handed him another glass of water and watched until he drank it. The yard was quiet. The lights were still stable. The workshop was a mess, but it was his mess, and the crew was still alive. He took a long, shaky breath and planned his next line. Mina ran the tests twice, once for accuracy and once for certainty. She started with Drew's eyes. Track my finger, she said, holding up her index, moving it side to side, then up and down. His gaze followed, but the world floated a little each time she crossed the midline. Lag, she asked. Little bit left, none to the right, he said, voice thick from the blood, and maybe the shock. She shone the penlight again. Both pupils responded, but the right took longer. She frowned and made a note, then moved to the hands. Open and close both fists, fast as you can. Drew tried. The left hand moved normally, the right took an extra beat to register the command. 3 fingers. The ring, pinky, and middle could barely make a fist at all. Mina squeezed each fingertip, watched his face. Tell me when you feel it. First 2 are fine, he said. She pinched the third. Nothing. 4th, nothing. 5th, there, he said, but it was more habit than sensation. Rook circled the breach, applying little pulses of domain mana to the wall. His eyes didn't leave the shimmer. Structure's holding, he reported. But that thing found a weak point. If you want to keep practicing, we need more reinforcement. After lunch, Drew said. Mina raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She checked his pulse, then asked for grip strength. Squeeze, she ordered. First the left, then the right. The left crushed the gauge to baseline. The right barely moved the dial. The foreman UI, watching everything, spat out a running report. Void exposure, moderate. Neural pathway stress, high. Blood loss, with intolerance. Comment, this is the cost of fine work. Mina reset the break table, logged every finding in the legal pad. Recovery window is up to 3 hours, maybe more. You'll probably get most of it back, but if you do this again tomorrow. He finished for her. Permanent damage? She shrugged. Call it a rolling average? There's an upper limit, but you haven't found it yet. Rook knelt by the patched breach, ran his hand along the wall. The shimmer was less now, but still there if he caught it at the right angle. We need to set more anchors, he said, or these things are just going to keep coming. The UI agreed. Perimeter integrity, suboptimal. Recommend immediate reinforcement. Comment, patch it with whatever you have. Mina poured him another glass of water, then went to prep a protein shake from the workshop's battered food bin. You want to talk about the taste? Metal, he said, and not in a good way. She wrote that down too. He flexed the right hand slow, watching the nerves try to remember their job. It was like starting a frozen diesel in winter. Everything worked, just slower and with more complaint. Rook watched him, then said, I'd seen worse from shock injuries. It comes back, if you let it. Drew nodded, then caught himself. Motion was off, timing weird. It's better already, he lied. Mina let it stand. She sipped her own shake and reviewed the notes, then looked up, dead center. Next time. Cut with the left if you can. Don't plan to have a next time. She gave him a look that said, You are absolutely going to have a next time. He almost smiled. The UI updated with the latest Void Shear 92% precision. Physical cost high, recovery time increasing. Comment, worth it if it saves the crew. Drew read the line, then looked at the row of cuts from earlier. The steel, the plex, the wood, all lined up in a neat row. Worth it, he said. A clean cut beats a messy tier. Mina glanced at the foreman's commentary, then at the hand. Precision costs, she said. If you go any finer, you might not get it back at all. Rook nodded, thumping the wall once for luck. Better to lose a finger than the whole arm. He grinned, then rotated the wrist and found the world almost steady again. That's the spirit. Mina packed up the med kit, signed off on the ship's log, and set it aside. Rest. Hydrate. And if you feel the world slip again, call me. He watched her clean the break table, fastidious as ever. then turned to the wall where the breach had been. The seam was gone now, a thin line where the domain had zipped itself shut. He flexed the hand, then the other. The numbness was there, but he could already feel it fading. The foreman's last comment for the day, comment, every slice takes something from you that might not grow back. But sometimes that's the only way to do the job. He didn't disagree. The crew was alive. The work was better. He'd pay what he had to. Chapter 43. The Keystone rumor survivors talk about anchors that calm rifts. Drew suspects dimensional stability can be engineered. Drew found the new soil layer just as the UI said he would, off the edge of the old concrete yard, behind the line where the workshop's poured slab used to pretend it was enough to stand on. The domain had grown it overnight, a wedge of raw, honest dirt, rising in a shallow shelf along the retaining wall like the world's most reluctant landscaping project. The dirt was darker than any Drew remembered from the real city, a nearly black loam that looked staged for a catalog photo. But when he knelt and pressed a hand to it, the texture was wrong. Finer, denser, almost greasy, with no stones or debris to break the illusion. The scent was clean, not earthy, carrying a coldness that didn't come from air. Where the layer met the domain's concrete, a faint shimmer showed, blue-white, not visible so much as inferred, like the light leaking from a dying LED behind a power panel. He checked the edge for stability. It failed. A web of hairline cracks ran outward from the wall, snaking through the soil and fanning along the old yard slab. The effect was quiet at first, but if you knew slab failure, you knew the story, expansion, then creep, then sudden drop. The whole shelf looked like it was waiting for a reason to move. Drew touched one of the cracks. The dirt felt warm, the gap itself cold enough to raise goosebumps through the glove. When he dug a fingertip into it, the crack widened, just a millimeter, but enough to make him draw back and wipe his hand on his jeans. Behind him, the rest of the workshop stayed the same. Tool racks, storage bins, the task light burning bright above the bench. No matter how much he changed the pocket, the domain remembered what mattered. Soil layer installed, water flow, standby. Note, irrigation not configured. Comment, no such thing as a free lunch. The foreman's sarcasm ran in a slow crawl at the edge of his vision. He tried to picture the next step. Reinforcement? Or patching the cracks with the world's worst joint compound? A slow scrape sounded from the workshop break area, the familiar deliberate slide of a stool on concrete. Mina came into the yard, her step lighter than before, medical clipboard tucked under one arm. She wore nitrile gloves, shoes wrapped in plastic, sleeves rolled tight over the elbows. Her hair was up, her expression clinical. Status? She asked, not waiting for eye contact. Drew pointed at the cracks. Soil's in, but the interface is bad. Like the whole thing doesn't want to touch the wall. She crouched next to him, checked the cracks with practiced hands, and frowned. It's too uniform. This isn't settling. It's resisting. Domain's not used to biology, Drew said. It's like grafting live tissue onto a steel beam. Mina made a note. Any instability in the slab? Nothing dangerous yet, Drew said, but I wouldn't put a load on it. She set the clipboard down. Let me see your hands. He hesitated, then ungloved. The right hand, once sturdy as a bricklayer's, now trembled at the edges. Fine trembled at the edges. Fine tremor, but the kind that came with warning labels. Mina pinched the fingertips, checked capillary response, then ran the pin light across the nail beds. Feeling? Pins and needles, Drew admitted. Thumb is slower than last night. She compared to her chart, nodded. You're getting back faster, but the baseline's lower. He forced a laugh. Progress. She didn't return it. Instead, she checked his eyes, then gestured for him to open his mouth. Taste? Metal? He said. Like I'd been a 9-volt. She added it to the list. No headache? He lied. Not yet. She glanced at the soil, then at the cracks. If the system keeps fighting the upgrade, it'll just keep making you pay. Drew flexed his fingers, watched the knuckles go white, then relax. That's what upgrades do. The foreman's text scrolled by, dry as sawdust. Void load, moderate. Domain string, increasing. Recommended action, reinforce now or pay later. He read the line, then looked at Mina. Can you monitor while I patch it? She nodded. If you drop, I'll drag you out. Noted, he said, then wiped his hand again and braced against the retaining wall. He called up the interface. Domain reinforce felt the mana drain as soon as he accessed it. The effect was more direct than he expected. The yard shuddered, a deep bass vibration that ran through the concrete and up the bones of his forearm. The cracks closed, not neatly, but like something hungry zipped them shut from the inside out. The dirt compacted, grew a little denser. The blue-white shimmer along the wall grew, then faded. Mana, 824, soil layer, reinforced, soil layer, reinforced. Side effect, fatigue, sensory distortion. Drew let out a long breath. The cold, hollow feeling rolled through his chest and settled behind the breastbone. He checked the slab. It felt solid again, but different, less like poured concrete, more like a thick layer of drywall mud that had set just enough to resist pressure but not enough to bear a load. If he forced it, it would fail, but if he paced it, the ground trembled again. This time, a soft slosh came from the far side of the yard. Water. He looked up. A thin stream had started along the inner curve of the retaining wall, trickling into a shallow channel that ringed the edge of the soil shelf. The flow was slow, precise, and so clear it almost didn't exist. Where it touched the dirt, the surface changed, went from dry and matte to rich, dark, alive. Drew stared, then grinned. It's making an irrigation system. Mina leaned over the edge, watched the water spiral. It's better than the city, she said. No lead, no rust, no soap scum. He watched the channel. It's too perfect. Nothing's that clean. She checked his pulse. You're cold, she said. It always runs cold when I patch, Drew replied. It's just the mana drain. The foreman's text flickered again. Irrigation nominal. Growth potential low. Limma resource limit nitrogen organics. Comment nice patch. Name about the food bot. Mina read the window, then pointed at the soil. We'll need to add compost, or something. Drew looked at the tool rack, then at the pile of spare gloves and masks, then at the break table where the day's supplies sat. We can pull from Gray City. There's abandoned nurseries. Hydro shops. Seeds? She asked. Maybe, he said. But it's not just seeds. It's keeping it alive once it's in. The ground vibrated again, this time less like a tremor and more like a warning. Rook's voice cut in from the entry. We got company, he said, hauling a coil of PVC pipe over one shoulder. Your upgrade let the pressure out, but the external's building. Drew stood, wiped the hands again, and moved to the workbench. How bad? Rook shrugged. Not immediate, but if you stack any more layers, the wall's gonna sweat. He set the PVC on the table with a thump. Brought salvage, and these. He held up a trowel and a packet of tomato seeds, both caked in Gray City residue. Mina took the seeds, turned the packet over. Expiration date's next year, she said. We might actually get a crop. Rook went to the soil layer and stabbed the trowel in, testing for depth. It's deep enough. But there's no worm action, no break-in. We'll need a starter batch of compost or it'll just dry up. Drew eyed the PVC. You want to set irrigation before we plant? Always, Rook said. Otherwise you're just moving mud from one side to the other. He gave Drew a once-over. You look like you're about to pass out. Mina answered for him. 90% function, 20% reserve. If he pushes, he'll blow the margin. Rook grinned. So, the usual. Drew rolled his eyes. Pipe layout? Rook got a marker from the bench and drew a quick sketch on the clean side of the clipboard. We do a central manifold, run feeder lines at every foot. If you want to expand, we just add a branch. He pointed at the retaining wall. We can tap water here, unless you want to bucket brigade it. Drew's spatial sense pinged. The wall's pressure was up, but nothing was coming through yet. He ran a hand along the old yard slab, felt the curve of the world around it, and visualized the new irrigation. It fit barely. Mina eyed the design. How long to install? An hour, if we pre-assemble, Rook said. Double that if the pipe cracks or the soil fights us. Drew looked at the foreman's window, read the implied challenge, irrigation install, scheduled. Next breakpoint, 54 minutes. Comment, get to work, then get out. He looked at the crew, then nodded once. Let's do it. Mina watched him. If you feel numbness in the left hand, you call me. He almost smiled. It's the only one I got left. She ignored the joke, then put a hand to his shoulder, quick and real. Don't overdo it, she said, then moved to the storage rack for more gloves. Rook started measuring the PVC, his hands moving with practiced speed. Drew set up the vise, then went back to the retaining wall and checked the patch. The shimmer was less now, the crack sealed. The cold, uneasy sense was still there, but it felt less like a threat and more like a warning siren switched to maintenance required. He pulled the trowel from the soil. You think it'll work? He asked, not sure if he was talking about the soil, the system, or the whole plan. Rook shrugged. If it doesn't, we get to try again. If it does, we eat tomatoes. Mina's voice from the racks, and we don't starve. The foreman chimed in, a little softer now. Comment, hope isn't a plan, but it's a nice perk. Drew let the cold from the wall sink in, then shook out his hands and got to work. The cracks would hold. The water would flow. He just had to make it last one shift longer. He could manage that. For now. The PVC had come from a plumbing supply closet in Gray City. Drew recognized the labeling, the pale blue stripes, the metric stencils, the end cap stamped with an inspector's initials. The pipe itself was clean, no deposits, no hard water scum. But when Drew sawed through it with the hacksaw, the burrs shivered blue-white for a moment before settling into a mundane, powdery mess. He lined up the next cut. The saw sang its way through the plastic, the cadence of the teeth a metronome for the morning. Rook fed him links from the coiled pile, stacking finished sections into a row as if prepping for an audit. They worked in a quiet rhythm, just the clatter of tools and the thud of pipe against the workbench. The generator hummed in its alcove, now running a little higher to support the new systems. Mina worked in the background, running a full inventory on the trauma kit. She stripped out expired meds, rebottled what she could, and laid everything else in neat rows on the break table. Every so often, she'd glance at the two of them, especially Drew, and make a note. The yard felt different. It wasn't just the new soil or the slight ambient humidity from the open water. It was the sense of things wanting to grow, the way light from the ceiling caught in the dust and stayed, the faint, perpetual scent of chlorophyll that wasn't there yesterday. Drew took another section of pipe, measured, then marked the cut with a Sharpie. His hands shook less than before, but the index fingers still went numb if he clutched the pipe for too long. Here, Rook said, passing the next length. You want the 90-degree elbow or the straight connector? Straight, Drew said. Run the feed line clean. If we need a turn, we add it after. Rook gave him a look. You're not running conduit. Water needs to flow. Drew grinned. So does electricity. If you don't brace the runs, you get a mess either way. Fair, Rook said. He went back to the pile, started deburring the already cut pieces. The UI floated an update. Irrigation 40% complete. Mana 824. Domain stability tolerable. Comment growth is pain. It was the foreman's version of encouragement. Drew started assembling the main feed. The solvent from Gray City worked, but it smelled sharper, more acidic, like lemon and ozone. He fitted 2 pieces, held them together, and watched the seam set. The blue-white pulse ran down the length, then faded. He liked the look of it. Clean, functional, something you could show to another tradesman and not be embarrassed. Rook said, You ever think about a second career in greenhouse work? Drew wiped his hands on a rag. Nah, too much standing water. Always hated the smell of peat. He set the next joint, then checked the connection for leaks. The water line behind the wall hummed a little louder, and when he opened the tiny test valve, the run filled instantly. Not a single drip escaped. He gave Rook a half smile. You want to do the honors? Rook set the next feeder in place, then twisted the joint with a practiced mechanic's snap. Done. They went down the line, adding in the small branches. Each time, Drew's hands shook a little less. Each time, the system came together with a little more rightness. Mina finished her log and came over, watched as they built the last run. You're both going faster, she said. Practice, Rook replied. Necessity, Drew said, almost at the same time. Mina held up a packet of seeds. When do you want to plant? Drew looked at the soil shelf. The irrigation sat on top of the dirt like a line of white bones. As soon as we finished the feed. She nodded, then started unrolling the tape measure, sizing up the shelf for planting intervals. The ground trembled. Not a polite warning quiver like before. This was a lateral wave, a quick slap from under the yard that threw both men into the workbench. The PVC rolled off the slab, clattering to the floor. The irrigation manifold snapped apart at one junction, water arcing across the concrete in a 2-second rainbow. Mina didn't flinch. She braced on the break table, then checked the walls. The UI screamed, domain stress, critical. Soil layer, partial collapse, mana, 624s, comment, patch or evacuate. Rook moved to the pipe, snapped it back into the coupling, then held it tight. Glue, he said. Drew went for the solvent, poured it, and rejoined the seam. His hands were fast, not steady, but the line set anyway. The water kept running, not a leak, but a gush, straight through the split and down onto the floor. The dirt layer on the shelf collapsed inward, spilling a wave of mud and black loam over the new concrete. Shut off, Rook yelled. Drew dashed to the main, cranked the valve hard. The flow slowed, then stopped. Mud continued to ooze out, but at least it wasn't a flood now. He looked at the breach. The dirt shelf, once a neat rectangle, was now a crater edged in wet black lines. A new web of cracks radiated from the failure point, and for a moment he thought the whole retaining wall would go with it. Mina came up behind him, flashlight in hand, and peered at the damage. That's not just settling, she said. The layer's not ready to hold weight. It's not bonded to the slab. Drew ran his hand over the dirt. The cold that hit him was stronger this time, almost a static shock. He saw in a blur the way the soil was layered, not in natural strata, but in alternating bands of loam, silicate, and void. The gap between each band was thin, a knife edge of nothing. Where the wall failed, the void expanded into the space, trying to fill, but never quite catching up. The water made it worse, eroding the edge and giving the emptiness a way in. He jerked his hand away, then looked at Mina. The dirt isn't real, not the way it needs to be. If we don't contain it, the void will keep eating it. She nodded, already understanding. Retaining walls. He looked at Rook. You ever set up a gabion cage? Rook grinned, teeth showing. You want to run mesh or stone? Drew laughed, the motion hurting his chest. Whatever we have. Mesh and scrap rebar, if the void will take it. Rook started gathering lengths of old wire from the storage bins, then scavenged nails, hooks, anything with a little strength. I'll make a jig, he said. Drew turned to the workbench, started sketching a plan on the surface with chalk. He drew a cross-section: yard, soil, wall, mesh cage, backfill. He shaded the problem areas, then boxed the void contact points. Mina knelt by the shelf, ran her own hands along the dirt, and said, "It's trying to heal. Every time you touch it, it gets more complex, but the energy draw is insane." The UI was less poetic: soil layer, unstable, energy demand, high, mana, 424s. Side effect: increasing fatigue. Drew saw the way the system was eating his reserves. We'll need to do this the slow way. Manual install. Brace the hell out of it. Let the domain catch up. Rook returned with the mesh, a tangle of rusted wire. It's ugly, but it'll hold. Mina helped them bend the mesh into place, her hands quick and unafraid of the sharp points. They set the first cage, then packed in the fallen dirt and mud. The effect was immediate. The edge stopped eroding, and the void shimmer at the wall edge faded back to a thin, manageable line. Drew let out a long breath, then sagged to one knee. The cold behind his sternum now ran to the tips of his fingers, a familiar but unwelcome drain. He tried to flex the right hand, found it sluggish. Mina noticed. "That's enough for now," she said. "Sit, let the layer settle." He didn't argue. He wiped sweat from his face and watched as Rook set the next brace, then the next, running them in a grid along the back wall. The UI dinged. Retaining wall, 32%. Stability, improving. Mana, 224. Comment: stop before you kill yourself. He closed his eyes for a second, tried to make the world stop spinning. When he opened them, Mina was kneeling beside him, checking pulse and respirations. "You're shivering," she said. "Not cold," he said. "Just used up." She opened the trauma kit, found a heat pack, and pressed it to his hand. "That'll help." Rook hammered the last brace into place, then stepped back, hands on hips, and surveyed the work. "Looks like a war zone," he said, "but it'll hold until we can do a real pour." Drew forced himself upright, watched the water line, now rejoined, trickling into the edge of the shelf. The soil absorbed the flow, darkening, but it didn't collapse this time. Mina set the seeds, evenly spaced in the wet dirt. She covered them, patted the surface, and gave Drew a look. "Want to say anything?" He thought about it. "Grow or die trying," he said. She smiled, not unkind. "That's one way to do it." The foreman added its own benediction comment: "You're good at patching what's broken. Maybe try building something that lasts." Rook joined them at the chalk sketch. The three of them hunched over the workbench, planning the next shift. They needed better walls, a way to drain excess, more energy, more time. But for now, the irrigation was in, the seeds were planted, and the void was kept at bay. Drew looked at his hands, still tingling, and flexed them once for luck. Tomorrow, he'd build the next layer. Tonight, the crew had done enough. After hours, the pocket's light changed. Even with the overheads holding steady, everything in the workshop and yard went blue at the edges. Like daylight, but sterile. A bright, cold shift that cast every shadow sharp and hollow. Drew liked the effect. It made the space look cleaner, less like an apocalypse triage, and more like the kind of place you could build something permanent. He stood by the retaining wall, holding a drip line in one hand, and tested the irrigation. Rook had built the main with quick-release valves, so Drew opened them one at a time, watching the water arc down the trench and into the dark soil. The channels filled, then overflowed in the right places, seeping into the mesh-braced shelf. There was a moment, right as the first run finished, where Drew felt genuine pride. "It works," he said. Rook, kneeling at the shelf, grinned. "Told you. Just needed a little structure." Mina came over with a ruler, pressing it into the dirt to check depth. "It's holding. No new cracks." Drew ran a hand over the mesh, then checked the UI. He was running on fumes, mana at 224, domain strain yellow but not red. Every breath left the ghost of metallic cold in his lungs. But for now, nothing was collapsing, no alarms. He watched as Rook dropped the first seeds in, each placed at measured intervals. The seeds were old, scavenged from a Grey City Hydro store. The labels faded, but the contents intact. Rook planted each as if it was a time capsule. The row nearest the edge was tomato. Next, beans. Then, a few grains of something unlabeled, maybe arugula or maybe weed. Mina took notes, marked the location and expected sprout time, then checked her phone for reference. If it's anything like baseline, we should see first shoots in 3 days. With the domain boost, maybe 1. Or never, Rook said, brushing soil over the last seed. "If we screwed up, they just rot. They'll sprout," Drew said. "It's too damn weird in here for them not to." He moved to the break table, poured a mug of instant coffee, and sat down. His arms felt like concrete. The left hand tingled, but the right was just numb now. Nothing left in the battery. He watched the crew work, Rook prepping the next row, Mina measuring, the two of them trading glances like real farmers at the end of a real shift. He blinked, then realized the shop lights had dimmed. For a moment, everything went black, then the backup LEDs flickered on, restoring the blue glow. The foreman's UI popped up, urgent, Mana 124, user at critical. Recommend, rest. Comment, you can't build if you're dead. Drew set the mug down, the motion almost dropping it. He flexed both hands, then held the wrist to the light. The veins showed. It wasn't a trick of the domain or a trick of the light. The capillaries on the back of his right hand, once just angry red and sore, now glowed faint blue-white, not bright, but visible. Mina noticed. She moved to him, checked the wrist, then turned his palm over, studying the web of color. That's new, she said. You feel different? He shrugged, too tired to bluff. Colder. Like I'm getting frostbite, but inside. She wrote it down. You're adapting. Or the void is. It's a two-way process. Rook called from the yard. Hey, boss, you want to see something? Drew forced himself up. The cold was worse now, but manageable. He walked to the shelf. Rook stood at the edge, pointing. A single sprout had broken the surface. Less than a centimeter, pale green, but alive. Mina checked her phone. That's 5 minutes from planting. Impossible, she said. Rook grinned, almost manic. We made a greenhouse that skips to the good part. Drew put a hand to the mesh, watching the tiny sprout vibrate in the domain light. It's burning through the energy, he said. If we don't feed it, it'll die. But if we keep the system stable, Mina finished for him, we're food independent. No wardens, no ration lines, no outside dependency. He did the math, 60 days to a full crop, maybe 40 if it keeps accelerating. Less if you don't push, Mina said. You need to rest or you won't see it. Drew stared at the sprout. We'll see it. The foreman's text chimed in, just this once, with a note of approval, soil layer stabilized, growth cycle initiated. Comment, the only way to win is to make something that lasts. Drew let the thought settle. He watched the sprout reach, the blue-white light making the green almost fluorescent. It was a beginning. And for tonight, that was enough.
Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.